A low ship horn cuts through the black screen. The ocean groans, endless and heavy. A phone rings in a locked cabin. The receiver lifts by itself, and your own voice whispers back through static. Crew members smile as they call you by a name you don't recognize. Footsteps pound above your ceiling, even though no deck was ever built there. In the dining hall, you freeze because you're already sitting at your table, raising a glass and staring right at you. A corridor flickers. Under fluorescent light, a cabin door appears, then vanishes, leaving only a smooth wall behind. Photographs scatter across the floor, every one of them showing you. In places you've never been, caught from angles no one should see. 10 disturbing cruise ship horror stories. True nightmares from the sea that will crawl under your skin and never let go. On the water, there's no land, no escape, no help. Only the endless dark and what waits inside it. This is Night Veins. Subscribe now, if you dare to come aboard. The intercom crackled at 2:37 a.m., and I bolted upright when I heard my name. Not just a random announcement, not garbled static, it was my full name, said slowly, carefully, as if the voice wanted to make sure I knew it was me. My cabin was dark except for the faint blue glow from the balcony curtains. The steady thrum of the ship's engines vibrated under the floor. I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the small speaker above the cabin door. The intercom buzzed again. This time, silence. Just the faint hiss of static. Then, please report. Now, my blood ran cold. The voice was flat, deliberate, like someone forcing their words through clenched teeth. I froze, staring at the little plastic grill in the ceiling. I was traveling alone on this cruise, my first real vacation in years. A 10-day Alaskan route that promised glaciers, wildlife, and quiet. By day, it was peaceful, crowded buffets, photo ops, endless ocean views. But at night, especially past midnight, the ship felt like another world entirely. The long hallways seemed too empty, too quiet. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe they had said a name similar to mine, but then I heard it again. Louder. My name, each syllable crisp, echoing through my cabin like it had been meant only for me. I grabbed the phone by the bed and dialed guest services. It rang and rang until a half-asleep voice answered. I blurted, "Why is my name being announced? What's going on?" The woman on the other end sounded confused. She asked what I meant. I told her the intercom had just called me by name. She hesitated, then said, "Sir, the intercom system doesn't make individual announcements. It's only for general messages." My chest tightened. "So, nobody announced anything just now?" "Not from here," she said. "Maybe you were dreaming." I hung up without replying. I wasn't dreaming. The silence in the cabin pressed against me. I thought about running into the hallway, maybe knocking on a neighbor's door just to hear another human voice. But something in me resisted. What if the intercom voice followed me there too? I sat up, pulled on my shoes, and opened the cabin door. The hallway stretched empty, lit by the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. No voices, no footsteps. Just the low hum of engines beneath the metal floor. I stepped out, letting the door close behind me, and immediately felt watched. My eyes darted from door to door. Every cabin looked identical, numbers glinting under the lights, all silent. Then, the intercom clicked on again. This time, it came from the hallway ceiling speakers, and again, it spoke my name. I felt every hair on my neck rise. My voice cracked as I called out, Who's doing this? No response. Only static, then a different voice, low and distorted, whispered through the speakers. We see you. I sprinted back to my cabin, fumbling with the keycard. When the lock beeped green, I slammed the door shut and shoved the deadbolt across. Though I knew it wouldn't stop much if someone really wanted in. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the balcony, bright and harmless, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it must have been a prank, or maybe even some kind of glitch. I went about my day breakfast buffet, walking the deck, a drink in the lounge. The ship bustled with people, laughter, cameras flashing. Nothing about it hinted at the voice I'd heard in the dark hours before. But when I returned to my cabin that afternoon, there was something waiting for me. Slipped under my door, on a piece of folded cruise, stationery, were 3 words written in shaky black ink: report. Tonight, alone. The note burned in my hand as I stood in the narrow hallway. I looked both ways. People strolled past. Kids in swimsuits ran toward the pool deck. A couple carried drinks back to their room. Normal life carried on, no one noticing the scrap of paper clutched in my fist. I slipped back into my cabin, locked the door, and unfolded it again just to be sure I hadn't misread. Report tonight, alone. Report where? To who? The intercom hadn't spoken all day, at least not to me. Only the usual ship-wide announcements about shows, buffets, excursions. Nobody said my name, but the words kept echoing in my head. Report tonight, alone. I tried to shake it off. Maybe someone was messing with me. A bored passenger, a cruel prank. I tossed the note onto the desk and went about the evening, but my nerves stayed raw. Every glance over my shoulder felt heavy, like someone was following me through the endless corridors. That night, close to 2 a.m., I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The cabin was dark except for the faint light bleeding through the curtains. My heart hammered, waiting for the intercom. A214. It clicked on, report now. The voice said. I froze, then it repeated my full name. Slowly, deliberately, I whispered to myself, don't. But my body was already moving. I slid into my shoes, pulled on a hoodie, and unlocked the cabin door. The hallway stretched silent, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The voice returned, louder now, echoing from the speakers. Deck 7, forward. My stomach dropped. That was one of the lower passenger decks, where fewer people went this late. I should have stopped, should have turned back, but the sound of my name drove me forward. I descended the stairwell, each step clanging under my weight. When I reached deck 7, the hallway was almost entirely empty. Only a few dim lights flickered against the metal walls. The intercom hissed, this way. The words were calm, but I swore I heard breathing behind them. I walked slowly, every step echoing. My shadow stretched long under the buzzing lights. I passed door after door, all shut tight. Then, ahead of me, a cabin door stood open, number 722. The light inside glowed faintly yellow. I stopped, frozen. That's when I noticed something. This wasn't a normal passenger cabin. The furniture was wrong, stripped down. A metal chair sat in the middle of the room, facing the door, like it was waiting for someone, waiting for me. The intercom crackled again, only static this time, then faint laughter. I backed away, shaking my head. No, I'm not going in. There. I turned to leave and the hallway lights went out. Pitch black swallowed me, the hum of the engines suddenly louder. My breaths came ragged. I groped along the wall, trying to find the stairs, when a sound drifted down the corridor. Footsteps, not mine, not slow, heavy. Approaching, I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath, heart racing so hard it hurt. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside the open cabin door. The lights flickered once, just enough for me to see a tall silhouette standing there, perfectly still. Then darkness again. The intercom whispered, "You came." I bolted. I ran blind through the hallway, hands scraping along the wall, slamming into corners until I found the stairs. I didn't stop until I reached my deck, lungs burning, legs shaking. When I finally burst into my cabin and locked the door, I collapsed against it, gasping. Silence pressed heavy against me. I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion and paranoia had twisted everything. But when I glanced at the desk, my blood went cold. The note was gone. In its place, a new one lay neatly folded. I picked it up with shaking hands. 4 words, scrawled darker this time, ink pressed deep into the paper. "Next time, don't run." The intercom clicked on one last time, and in the silence of my cabin, the voice whispered my name, soft, patient, certain. The first photograph appeared under my cabin door before sunrise, and it was of me sleeping. I awoke when the paper scraped faintly against the carpet. At first, I thought it was just part of my imagination, the hum of the ship engines messing with my dreams. But when I got up and opened the door, there it was, a glossy photo lying face down in the hallway. My heart sank when I picked it up and turned it over. It was me, lying in bed. This bed, the same blanket pulled over me, the same tilted angle of my head. My stomach flipped. Someone had been inside this room, close enough to take the shot without waking me. I told myself maybe it was staged, some weird prank, maybe even a reflection in the mirror across the room. But the angle didn't lit, was from above, like someone had leaned over me with a camera. I locked the door again and bolted the chain. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the photo. It was my 3rd night on the cruise, a week-long trip along the Pacific coastline. I'd booked the ticket to get away, to escape the stress of work and the suffocating loneliness of my apartment. The ship had promised relaxation, endless buffets, open decks, and night shows. But now all I felt was a crushing unease, standing in a cabin that suddenly didn't feel like mine at all. I barely slept after that. I sat upright with the lights on, listening for footsteps outside my door. Every creak of the ship made me flinch. By morning, I decided it had to be a joke. Maybe housekeeping found an old picture. Maybe a guest dropped it. I carried it to the front desk and tried to explain. The woman behind the counter frowned, glanced at the photo, and asked, "Is this you?" "Yes," I snapped. "In my cabin, in my bed." She studied me like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or call security. She said, "We'll make a note of it," and slid the picture out of sight. Her tone made it clear she didn't believe me. I walked away furious, but beneath the anger was dread. If they didn't believe me, what would I do when it happened again? That night, I locked the door, latched the chain, even shoved a chair under the handle. The walls hummed with the constant drone of the engines. I left the lights on and sat waiting. At 4:12 a.m., I heard the faint scrape again. My chest clenched. I crept to the door, heart hammering. Another photo lay on the carpet. I picked it up with shaking hands. This one showed me standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a sleeping shot. Someone had followed me into the most mundane, private moment. I hadn't seen anyone that night. No shadows, no clicks of a camera. The photo was grainy but clear enough to show the toothbrush. Halfway to my mouth, I slammed the chair harder under the handle, crawled back into bed, and stared at the ceiling until morning. By breakfast, I'd convinced myself I couldn't stay quiet. I cornered a security officer in uniform and demanded they take it seriously. He studied the photo, then asked if I might have staged it myself. The question made me want to scream. "No," I hissed. "I didn't take a picture of myself, brushing my teeth. Someone is in my room." He promised to review surveillance. I could tell he didn't expect to find anything. That night, I hardly breathed as I sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't even bother pretending to sleep. I watched the door, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, right before dawn, it came again. The scrape, my body froze, but my mind screamed to move. I rushed to the door, yanked it open, and the hallway was empty. Just a faint hum of machinery and rows of identical cabin doors. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. The photo on the floor made my stomach twist into knots. This time, it wasn't. Inside my room, it was me sitting in the dining hall earlier that day, plate of food in front of me, staring off toward the window. Someone had been following me on board, watching me when I didn't notice. And they weren't just taking pictures. They wanted me to know. By the fourth morning, I didn't even need to wait. I woke seconds before the scrape, my nerves raw and wired. The photo slid under the door like clockwork. I picked it up with dread curling in my stomach. This one was the worst yet. It showed me opening yesterday's photo at my cabin door, my expression pale, terrified. The picture had been taken from behind me. Someone was there in the hallway, close enough to see every detail. I pressed my back against the door, clutching the photo. My chest heaved. Whoever it was, they weren't just sneaking pictures anymore. They were taunting me, showing me how close they could get without being caught. I barely made it through the day. Every crowded lounge, every stretch of deck, I scanned the faces around me. Every stranger looked like they might be holding a camera. The families laughing at the pool, the old couple shuffling past the buffet. The man leaning on the railing, smoking. Any one of them could be the one. I told myself I'd catch them that night. I shoved my phone under the crack of the door with the camera recording. If someone slid a photo under, I'd have them on video at 3:57 a.m. The scrape came. My pulse raced as I checked the phone. The recording showed nothing, no hand, no movement, just the photo sliding across the carpet as if by itself. I swallowed hard and picked it up. It was a shot of me, hunched in bed, staring wide-eyed toward the door. The angle made no sense, was like it had been taken from the ceiling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the room apart, rip down the panels, search every vent. Instead, I sat trembling, clutching the image. By now, the crew was avoiding me. The front desk smiled politely, but brushed me off. Security promised to monitor, but nothing changed. I felt like the entire ship was conspiring to ignore what was happening to me. On the sixth morning, I woke to silence. No scrape, no photo. Relief washed over me so quickly I nearly cried. But when I stepped into the hallway, my stomach dropped. 30 or 40 photos lay scattered across the floor, all pushed from under my door during the night. I fell to my knees, rifling through. Then with shaking hands, each one showed me sleeping in different positions, dozens of angles, different times. My eyes closed, my body twisted under the blanket. The last one made me drop the stack. It was me, awake, eyes wide open, staring directly at the camera. I don't even remember that moment. I couldn't stay another second. I packed frantically, throwing clothes into my suitcase with trembling hands. I didn't care that the trip wasn't over. I needed to get off the ship at the next port. When we docked that afternoon, I went straight to the purser's desk and demanded to disembark early. They told me it was impossible, that my ticket wasn't transferable, that I'd need special clearance. I didn't argue. I just waited for shore leave, slipped off with a group of passengers, and found the nearest hotel. For the first time in days, I slept deeply. No scrape, no photos. But when I awoke the next morning, there was a slip of paper under my hotel room door. One single photograph. It was me, leaving the cruise ship the day before, suitcase in hand, glancing over my shoulder. I dropped it and backed away, bile rising in my throat. The hotel door had been locked, double-chained. Still, the photo was inside. I called the police. They came, took my statement, studied the photo. They said they'd investigate, but their eyes told me they thought I was paranoid, maybe unstable. I checked out the next day and flew home. For weeks, nothing happened. No photos, no knocks, no signs that anyone was still following me. I started to believe maybe it had ended, until yesterday morning, when I opened my front door to leave for work. There was a small envelope on the mat. Inside were a dozen glossy photos, all of me, sleeping in my own bed. The door flashed red and beeped at me like I was a stranger to my own cabin. I swiped the keycard again, slower this time, and the little screen above the handle blinked denied, already inside. My stomach did a small, cold flip. I was outside the door, swaying a little with the ship, bag of buffet leftovers cooling in my hand. The hallway was quiet, except for the low mechanical hum running through the metal bones of the deck. I tried the handle anyway. Locked. A couple in flip-flops walked past, glanced at me, and kept going. I swallowed the urge to laugh it off and headed for the nearest elevator, because the longer I looked at that red light, the more I felt like I'd come back to a room that wasn't mine anymore. Guest services was down on deck 5 by the atrium, where everything smelled like cologne, sanitizer, and frosting. The woman at the desk smiled, the way people do when they've smiled through 100 complaints. I slid the card toward her and said my door thought I was already inside. She tapped her keyboard, glanced at the screen, and her smile went stiff. At the edges. "It shows here your cabin was accessed at 21:13 by your card," she said. "That would be 7 minutes ago." "I've been at the late show," I said. Then I stopped at the buffet. "I haven't been back to my room." She frowned harder and turned the monitor slightly away, like the screen had suddenly become classified. "Sometimes the strip demagnetizes. I'll reissue." She printed a new card, wrote my cabin number, 8239, on a sleeve, and I turned to go. The elevator doors opened with a sigh. I stepped in with 2 men in suits, both smelling like whiskey and aftershave. As the doors closed, the overhead speaker crackled, "Security to guest services." I didn't think anything of it until the elevator dinged back on my floor and the doors slid open to the same quiet hall. I walked to 8239, tried the new card, and it flashed green. I exhaled a laugh that felt too loud and stepped inside. The bathroom light was on. The mirror was fogged around the edges, like someone had just showered. My towel, the ship's logo, a neat little wave in the corner lay draped over the rail. DAMP. I'd left it hanging straight that afternoon, crisp and dry. My toothbrush was wet. The bedspread had a crease down the middle, like a careful hand had smoothed it, and then pressed in with 2 knees. Every hair on my arms lifted. I checked. The closet, the bathroom, the balcony, empty. The balcony door was locked from the inside. Outside, the ocean was a black page, the wind smearing salt across the glass. I slid the chain across the door and sat on the edge of the bed, my shoes still on, listening to my own breath and the steady bass note of the engines. Sleep wasn't going to happen, so I unpacked the pile of papers they put in the little leather folder on the desk. Sure, excursion pictures, a souvenir coupon book, tomorrow's schedule. Buried inside was a slip I hadn't seen before. Housekeeping courtesy, card stamped, completed for a turned-down cabin, 6115. The guest name printed in blocky, misaligned letters. My name. I marched back to guest services with the card. A different attendant was there now. A guy with a perfect part in his hair and a name tag that read Eduardo. This says, I got turned down service in 6115, I said. I'm in 8239. He typed, the way people type when they plan to prove you're wrong. His eyebrows pinched together. That's odd, he said. It shows. One moment. He picked up a phone, murmured into it, then hung up and looked at me the way a doctor looks before telling you a thing you won't like. Sir, our system shows your key card accessed 8239 at 2113 and 6115 at 2112 tonight. That's impossible. It's what the security log shows. Maybe someone cloned my card. He nodded. It's rare, but misissuance can happen if cards are coded over each other. I'll escalate to security. He leaned closer. Did you notice anything missing? I thought of the bathroom light, the damp towel, the toothbrush, just that someone was in my room. Security met me 10 minutes later in a small office off the back hall where the carpet changed from patterned ocean waves to grey utilitarian squares. 2 screens glowed with gridded camera feeds. Elevators, casinos, corridors. The officer introduced himself as Garvey, late 30s, close-cropped hair, not unfriendly. Let's walk through your timeline, he said. I told him, the show, the buffet, the red light, guest services, back to my room, the towel, the card for 6115. He scrubbed back, camera, footage to 2110. The elevator on my deck opened. A man in a dark ball cap stepped out, head down, hoodie pulled up. He walked to 8239. The camera was down the hall, a long shot, with faces, just a suggestion. The man swiped, went inside at 2113. At 2112, on a different feed, a similar cap and hoodie approached 6115 on deck 6, swiped, and went in. The second angle caught a reflection in a framed art print opposite the door. For a split second, a jawline, a cheek. The officer paused the frame and squinted. Could be the same person, he said. I leaned in until the screen blurred. The reflection could have been anyone, but the shape of the brow, the nose, it looked so much like mine that my stomach turned. It's not me, I said softly. We'll recode your lock, Garvey said, and put a flag on your name. If your card or cabin is accessed again, we'll get a ping. He walked me back and watched a crew member reprogram my door. I thanked them both and locked every bolt twice, then shoved a chair under the handle. Like a child, I unrolled a pair of socks and wedged one in the metal door catch, just barely, so the slightest movement might tug it free and hit the floor. I put one of those tiny glass water bottles from the minibar on the inner handle so if it jostled, it might clink and wake me. I recorded a video on my phone pointed at the sliver beneath the door, a narrow view that caught only the threshold. I lay down, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sometime around 3, I woke like I'd been yanked up on a string. The room was quiet. My eyes adjusted. The bottle still sat on the handle, catching a dull rectangle of the hallway light leaking under the door. I whispered to myself that I was being dramatic. At 3:18, the phone on the desk rang. I flinched so hard my shoulder jolted against the headboard. What woke the phone? Nobody calls at 3 unless something is wrong. I picked up silence, then the soft, tinny buzz of an open line. A voice, just above a whisper. You left your other room unlocked. A click, and nothing. I stood so fast, the blood left my head. My other room. I put the receiver down gently, like noise might break the air. I grabbed my key and went to the door. The chair scraped against the carpet. The socks stayed wedged. The bottle didn't clink. I pressed my ear to the wood. The hall hummed its same eternal hum. I opened the door. There was a housekeeping courtesy card on the floor. No footsteps, no shadow, just that same stamped completed, this time for Towel Refresh Cabin, 6115, the same name, mine. I shouldn't have gone, but fear does. A stupid thing to you. It sends you straight to the thing you're afraid of, just to prove it has edges. I took the stairs down to deck 6, because waiting for an elevator felt like murder. The hall that held 6,115 looked like every other on this ship. Endless repeat of doors and framed prints that looked expensive but weren't. I paused at the corner, peered down the stretch, listened, nothing. I walked to 6,115 and stared along. Time at the numbers. The door was ajar by a finger's width. The smart thing would have been to call security. Instead, I pushed with one knuckle and let the silence open a little wider. It was a mirror of my room's same bed, same desk, same cheap art. The air smelled like my shampoo. On the desk sat a leather folder, identical to mine, except the welcome. Letter inside had my name at the top in the same bold ship font, and the signature at the bottom that welcomed me aboard had my exact spidery last name, scribble. I hadn't signed anything like that. I hadn't even seen a paper on embarkation die. Did it on a tablet. The bathroom door was half shut. I could hear a drip from the shower head. There were 2 toothbrushes on the sink, both my brand, both the same color. One was wet. I stepped backward, and the door fell to with a click that sounded like a finger on a lighter. I ran without remembering the parts in between the long hall. The stairs, my door. I locked myself back into 8,239 and turned on every light. I didn't sleep. At 6, I carried the courtesy cards and what little courage I had left to security. Garvey wasn't on duty yet. The woman at the desk took the cards and wrote the time on a form and promised to pass them along. She said the thing people always say, "You're safe here." I inhaled like the ship's fake clean air might disinfect whatever had crept into my hours. Sat by the window of a coffee shop and watched the horizon bruise into morning. I thought daylight would end it. Daylight makes stupid things seem stupid. Again. But at lunch, a server set down a plate I hadn't ordered and said, "You always get this," and my mouth tried to tell a joke to make it normal and failed. At the pool deck, I saw a man in a cap leaning on the rail, turned half away from me. The slope of his shoulders was mine. He lifted a cup to his mouth. The face in profile could have been my own if I'd been squinting into sun, or if my eyes had already decided to be afraid. He looked over his shoulder. I stood, but a girl ran between us with a towel like a flag, and when the towel fell out of my view, the cap was gone. That afternoon, Garvey tracked me down by the theatre. He had a printout in his hand and a new tightness around his mouth. "We scrubbed the logs," he said. At 3:20 a.m., a master key opened 6,115. 2 minutes later, the same master opened 8,239. I don't have a master. We know, we checked. We think a crew member may be involved. We're interviewing. He lowered his voice. We also pulled camera stills. The person going into 6,115 at 3:20 was wearing your jacket. My jacket is in my closet. Garvey glanced past me like he didn't want to say what he said next. Maybe check again. I left him with my mouth half open and walked fast back to my room. The closet door slid aside with that cheap rattling track sound. My jacket hung where I'd left it. I sighed in relief that felt like a mistake, and then patted the pockets out of habit. Wallet, nothing else. I ran a thumb along the seam where I kept a fold of cash during travel. Empty. I checked the other pocket. My spare keycard was gone. I sat down on the bed very carefully, as if the wrong shift of weight might break the thin plank of reality I was balancing on. The phone rang again. I stared at it. It rang without a voice this time, just an old-fashioned bell in a box noise. When I picked up, the line breathed. "We need you to stop crossing decks," the voice said. Calm, polite, a timbre I recognized, because I hear my own voice every day. Not identical, not a playback, but close enough that my throat felt tight. "Stay to your hallway. We'll handle the other one. Who is we?" Click. I stopped calling guest services. That night, I jammed a folded towel under the door gap and taped a hair across the latch like I was in a spy movie. Paranoid looks ridiculous until it's the only thing that makes sense. I left the TV on Too Fake Company and sat in the chair by the door with my shoes on and my passport in my pocket. Sometime after midnight, the ship announced in that cheerful recorded tone that the Midnight Desert Bar was open. I laughed, and it came out like air leaving a tire dot at 104. The light under my door changed like someone's shadow had crossed it. The towel didn't budge. The latch hair didn't move. No sound, then a very soft slip. I opened the door fast. An envelope lay on the carpet. The hall was long and empty. I brought the envelope inside and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, torn from the daily schedule. On the back, in thin blue pen, you can check out of one, but not both. Below it, a copy of a security log print. My name, 2-door opens, 6,115, 8,239. Times listed 1 minute apart, stamped verified. The last full day at sea, I did something small and unoriginal. I asked to change cabins. The manager nodded with a look that said he had been instructed to accommodate me as if accommodation were the same as safety. He reassigned me to deck Tenyuki, new number. I dragged my suitcase under brighter, newer lights. I changed my lock code twice in under an hour, like that would matter. The balcony outside the new room felt closer to the sky, farther from the sea. I switched the privacy sign to Do Not Disturb and taped it down like I was trying to tape a storm to a door. I slept for maybe 30 minutes. When I woke, a soft dawn made everything look pretend. I walked into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and wiped the mirror clear. A second towel hung on the rail that I hadn't put there. My eye followed a neat little ship logo stitched in the corner. Someone had folded it in the tight, squared-off way only crew do. I put my hand on the door and listened. The room sounded like a room. I opened the door anyway. There was an envelope on the carpet. Inside was my itemized folio, the one you normally get on the last morning before disembarkation. 2 rooms listed 1,239 and 6,115 each, with nightly charges, each with minibar hits and late-night phone calls, each signed electronically by me. Under the signatures, the same misshapen squiggle that had never been mine until it had to be. My throat clicked when I tried to swallow. I took the folio to Garvey. He looked older by then, like the weight of a thing doesn't care if you have a badge. "We've examined our cruise master key logs," he said carefully. "We're interviewing 2 staff who had access to both decks. We've deactivated all MasterCards except mine." And he hesitated. "We may have to ask you to remain on board at disembarkation for a formal statement. You think I did this to myself. I think something's happening that's hard to explain with the tools we have." I said I'd give him a statement. I drifted the afternoon like a piece of mail stuck in a ship's vent. I watched a trivia contest I didn't play. I ate at the grill and tasted nothing. I walked the promenade where the wind made everything feel like a movie you watch through glass. At sundown, the sky bled orange and then turned iron. At midnight, the sea went black as ink. At 2:11 a.m., my room phone rang. I didn't pick up. It rang until it learned I wouldn't. It stopped. 5 minutes later, the hallway phone outside rang. I stared at the door like I could see sound. The ringing cut off as if a hand had covered a bell. A soft knock followed. Not loud, polite. 2 knuckles, twice. I didn't move. The knock repeated. I put my eye to the P-E-E-P-H-O-L. No one stood there. Or rather, the stupid trick of peepholes, the way they swallow, edges showed only the slice of wall opposite and the art print with its circular, metallic frame. In the reflection, in that little round frame, tilted just right by the convex glass of the peephole, I saw a person in a cap standing pressed to the side of my door, leaned out of view, head turned, watching the peephole. For a half-breath we regarded each other in a chain of lenses. I stepped back. The soft knock came again, 2 knuckles, twice. Then the envelope slipped across the floor. "Disembarkation instructions," the printed header said. On the back, "We already checked you out of 6,115. In the morning, a uniformed officer waited outside my door with Garvey. They walked me past happy people rolling luggage, through the VIP lounge you get sent to when your situation is its own kind of upgrade. We sat in a small room near the gangway. They asked if I had enemies, if I had a partner, if I had ever felt like 2 people. I gave them what I had: a timeline, a stack of envelopes, a voice I didn't trust. Then they handed me my final folio. I signed where they pointed without reading the totals because I wanted dirt under my shoes that didn't belong to a ship. As I walked down the gangway, the scanners beeped at each passenger, green arrows filling the air. Mine lit yellow. The agent looked at her screen, frowned, and waved over a supervisor. He smiled like it was nothing and typed, then looked up. "It looks like you've already disembarked," he said lightly, as if reading a joke written by a computer. I'm right here. Of course, he said. Just a system hiccup. He hit a key that made a green arrow anyway. In the terminal, luggage circled like cattle around a pen. Tags flapped. A man in a cap lifted a dark jacket that looked exactly like mine and put it on. I opened my mouth, but a toddler cried somewhere, and a woman laughed, and the sound swallowed the things we say too late. The man turned his head just enough for me to see the line of his cheek. I stepped toward him. He stepped into the crowd. I moved faster. He moved faster. People became weather bags and elbows and quilted vests. He reached the doors. He went out into the ordinary bright morning that makes nights lie. I pushed through, heart-banging dot, outside 100 taxis idled. The man in the cap opened the rear door of the third car, half-turned as if to make sure I could see his face. It was mine if I wanted it to be, or it was just a face under a brim in a world that gives you shapes and invites your fear to color them in. He slid inside, the door shut. The taxi moved off at that slow, patient first-gear roll. My phone buzzed. A notification from the ship's app I'd forgotten to uninstall. Door access alert cabin, 8239, 803. Below it, door access alert cabin, 6115, 803, 2, at once. Then a final note pushed to the lock screen: no sender, no subject, just text. We'll handle the other one. I turned, looking back at the gleaming white hull, while smoke from the funnels made its streaks against the morning. People streamed down the gangway, every one of them in a little story I couldn't see. I pocketed the phone, lifted my bag, and stepped into a crowd that hadn't learned my name yet. Already sure that on some deck I'd never find again, a door had just unlocked. For me. The first night it happened, I opened my cabin door and nearly tripped over them my own shoes. Soaked through, sitting neatly on the carpet, I froze, hands still gripping the handle, staring down at them. They were my sneakers, the pair I'd worn boarding the ship that afternoon. Only I hadn't left them out there. They'd been inside, by the bed, tucked under my bag where I always kept them. Now they dripped water onto the patterned hallway carpet. Dark stains spreading under the soles. I bent down slowly, half expecting to find someone crouched nearby, laughing at the prank. The hallway stretched silent in both directions. Cabin doors lined the long corridor, all closed. The faint thrum of the engines vibrated through the floor. I touched the laces, ice cold. My fingers came away damp, smelling faintly of salt. I snatched them up and darted back inside, slamming the door and bolting it. My heart pounded in my throat. I tossed the shoes into the bathroom, not wanting to look at them, and pressed my back against the door. This was my second night on the cruise, a week-long trip up the coast. I'd booked it alone, hoping for a quiet break. The first day had been fine buffet food, long views of the ocean, the hypnotic sway of the decks. But now all I could hear was the water dripping from the sneakers onto the tile floor. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me sit up, ears straining. When I finally dozed, I dreamed of footsteps squelching outside my door, pacing up and down. The hall, in the morning, the shoes were still damp. I carried them down to guest services, cheeks hot with embarrassment. I tried to explain. The man behind the counter looked polite but distant. Perhaps you left them outside to dry, he suggested. No, I snapped. They were under my bag, inside my room. He glanced at his screen, tapped a few keys, then shrugged. No reports of disturbance. If you'd like, We can send housekeeping to replace the carpet runner in your cabin. That was it. No investigation, no security, just a shrug and a smile. Walked away furious but unsettled. Who could have taken them? The cabin was locked. My key card was always on me. Unless someone had access, or unless the shoes hadn't been inside to begin with. By afternoon, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe I'd left them by the door without realizing. Maybe the salt air warped my memory. But that night, when I returned from dinner, they were there again, the same sneakers, sitting outside my cabin door, soaked through, dripping onto the carpet. I stood frozen, tray of leftover dessert trembling in my hands. I looked around, hoping someone would laugh, reveal it as a prank. The hallway was empty, silent. I knelt. The shoes weren't just wet. They were coated in a thin film of brine and grit, like they'd been dragged along the ocean floor. I lifted one and a tiny scrap of seaweed clung to the sole. My stomach lurched. I shoved them inside and bolted the door. That night, I hid them. Under the bed, I placed my suitcase in front of the cabin door as a barrier, heart pounding with each sound in the corridor. The shoes stayed hidden until I fell into an uneasy sleep. But at dawn, when I opened my eyes, they were gone. I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering. The space under the bed was empty, dust-free except for 2 wet outlines where they'd been. I staggered to the door, yanked it open, and nearly fell. The shoes sat neatly in the hallway again, dripping onto the carpet. This time, they weren't mine. They were the same style, the same size, but not the same pair. These were newer, the brand logo different, the color wrong. But they were soaked, briny, coated with grit, and tied to one. Lace was a strip of cruise ship towel, torn ragged, still damp. I picked up the strip of towel with trembling fingers. The ship's logo was still visible in faded blue stitching. My cabin number was printed faintly on the tag housekeeping always marked them. Whoever left this knew exactly which room was mine. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, sweat beading at my hairline. I dropped the shoes into the shower stall, turned the water on full blast, and watched the grime and brine swirl down the drain until they looked almost new. But no amount of rinsing could wash away the thought that they hadn't belonged to me. Someone else had worn them. That day I kept 2 crowded areas: the buffet, the pool deck. Anywhere noise drowned out my thoughts. But even surrounded by people, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. At dinner, I caught sight of a man 2 tables over. His shoes dripped faintly onto the carpet beneath his chair. I blinked, and when I looked again, they were dry, spotless. He glanced at me once, expression unreadable, before rising and leaving without finishing his meal. I barely ate. When I returned to my cabin, the hallway was empty. My door looked the same as always: do not disturb sign hanging. Security latch, waiting. I checked underneath. Nothing. For the first time, relief trickled through me. Maybe it had stopped. Maybe whoever was tormenting me had lost interest. I slept hard, DREAMLESS, but at 3:17 a.m., a sound yanked me awake. Drip, 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 drip. I sat up, heart racing. The sound wasn't coming from the bathroom, it was right outside the cabin door. I crept closer, barefoot, pressing my ear to the wood. The steady rhythm of water falling onto carpet made my stomach twist. I slid the chain, opened the door a crack, and froze. A pair of shoes sat neatly in the hallway. Different again. These were leather loafers, ruined, their once brown color darkened by water. Seawater pooled beneath them, spreading into the carpet. The hallway was deserted. I shut the door fast, hands shaking. My phone on the desk buzzed with a notification from the ship's app. Guest services, lost and found notice please. Return items to deck 5. Lost and found. Were these shoes taken from other cabins? Was someone planting them here? I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the loafers were gone. I hadn't touched them, hadn't even opened the door again. But when I stepped into the hall, the carpet was damp in the exact outline of their soles. I went straight to security. The officer listened, frowning, then asked me to wait. He disappeared into the back and returned with a clipboard. "We've had complaints of missing items," he said carefully. "Shoes, towels, even clothing, but nothing returned like you describe. Someone's putting them outside my door every night, wet, like they've been dragged through the ocean." His lips tightened. "Cabin number," I told him. He wrote it down. "We'll keep an eye." But his voice told me he didn't believe a word. That night, I set up my phone again, camera aimed under the door. I stacked 2 chairs against the handle, shoved my suitcase against them, heart hammering at every creak of the ship. I woke at dawn, startled by silence. No dripping, no scrape of soles against the carpet. I reached for my phone, hands sweaty, and replayed the video at exactly 2:59 a.m. A shadow darkened the gap under the door. The outline of shoes appeared, still, as if someone stood perfectly. Outside, the frame caught the faint reflection of water spreading across the carpet. Then, without the sound of movement, the shoes slid slowly into view. But there were no legs above them, no hand pushing them forward. Just the shoes, alone, inching into place, leaving wet trails behind. I dropped the phone, bile rising in my throat. I forced myself to open the door, half certain I'd collapse. The shoes were there, slick with seawater. Smaller, this time-delicate white sneakers like a child might wear. Salt crusted the edges. A tiny sock was stuffed inside one, damp and wrinkled. I staggered back. My mind screamed at me to hurl them overboard, to run to security again, to do anything but stand staring. Instead, I shut the door, curled on the bed, and waited for daylight. When I finally dozed, it was restless. Shallow dot at breakfast. The family at the next table laughed over pancakes. A little girl swung her feet, her shoes dangling. They were bare, no sneakers. Her parents didn't seem to notice. I left the dining hall without, finishing my coffee by the final night of the cruise. I was hollow-eyed, drained. I packed early, desperate to leave the ship behind. But as I zipped the last bag, a sound froze me in place. A soft knock at the door. Not a knock for entry to taps. Deliberate, just above the floor. My throat tightened. Slowly, I opened it. The hallway stretched silent, and there they were again. A pair of shoes my own this time. The same sneakers from the first night. Dry, spotless laces, tied neatly. A folded note sat on top. With shaking hands, I picked it up. 3 words, scrawled in jagged ink. "Wear them home." The sound of footsteps yanked me awake in the middle of the night. Heavy thuds directly above my cabin ceiling. I froze, staring up into the dark. At first, I thought it was just another passenger pacing in the room overhead. But my stomach turned, cold as I remembered there was no deck above me. I was on the top passenger level. Beyond my ceiling was only open sky and the thrum of the ship's funnels. The steps continued, steady and deliberate, one after another, moving across the ceiling like someone was taking their time, dragging weight with each stride. The lights in my cabin flickered once, then steadied. I pulled the blanket tighter to my chest, listening with my whole body. Then, just as suddenly as they'd started, the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down on me, thick and heavy, broken only by the low hum of the engines far below. I lay there for an hour, wide-eyed, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't, eventually, against my better judgment. I convinced myself it had been a dream. By morning, daylight and laughter in the hall made the memory feel less real. Still, I couldn't stop glancing at the ceiling during breakfast, imagining shoes stamping across the metal roof above me. I asked at guest services if crew accessed the top of the ship during the night. The woman at the desk smiled politely and said, "No maintenance scheduled overnight, sir." Then who would have been walking above my cabin? I asked. Her smile stiffened. Noise travels strangely on ships. It could have been from down the hall, even below you. I didn't argue. I just walked away with a knot twisting my gut. That night, I triple-checked the lock, shoved my suitcase against the door, and tried to sleep with the television murmuring. Low, at 2:41 a.m., the footsteps came back, slower this time, louder. They started near the far corner of the cabin ceiling, moved directly over my bed, and paused. I couldn't breathe. My eyes locked on the vent above, half expecting a face to peer through the slats. Then came 3 sharp taps, directly overhead. Like knuckles on the ceiling, I bolted upright, heart pounding. "Hello." My voice cracked in the silence. The footsteps resumed crossing back toward the balcony side of the room. The glass door rattled faintly, though it was locked from the inside. Then silence again. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn, I stumbled onto the open deck, eyes burning from exhaustion. Crew bustled about, passengers queued for breakfast. I wandered to the railing and looked up at the roof above my cabin. Smooth white metal gleamed in the morning sun. No ladders, no walkways, no reason for anyone to be up there still. The footsteps had been real. That evening, I told a security officer what I'd heard. He looked bored, then shrugged. "Sound travels weird out here. The ship is metal, it echoes." But I'd lived in apartments all my life. I knew the difference between echoes and deliberate footsteps. I tried to relax that night, but when 2:40 rolled around, I sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Right on schedule, the footsteps started again. This time, I grabbed my phone and started recording. The thuds moved slowly across the ceiling, stopping directly above me. I held the phone out, capturing every sound, my hands shaking. Then, clear as day, the audio picked up something else. A voice, a man's voice, muffled but distinct, saying my name. I dropped the phone. My blood ran cold. I didn't move for the rest of the night. The next morning, I played the recording back. The footsteps were there, faint but audible. But the voice, nothing. Just static, the faint hum of the ship. My throat tightened. Had I imagined it? At breakfast, I scanned the crowded dining hall, searching for any face that lingered too long. On me, a man at the next table stared in my direction, not at me but just past me, as though waiting for me to notice. He wore plain clothes, no name tag, and when I turned to look directly at him, he smiled thinly and stood, walking away without finishing his plate. That night, I stayed out late on purpose, drifting through the lounges, watching the midnight show, anything to avoid going back to my cabin. I finally returned past 1 a.m., too tired to keep walking at 2:42. The footsteps returned. This time, they didn't stop above my bed. They circled, around and around, pacing directly over me like a predator tracing the edges of a cage. The ceiling creaked faintly with each heavy step. I clutched the blanket to my chin, every muscle locked. Then, from the balcony door, came a single, sharp knock. I jumped, heart racing. I stumbled toward it, then froze, on the inside of the glass. Just above the lock, streaks of wet footprints trailed downward, bare feet. I backed away, shaking, eyes fixed on the prints as they slowly faded, leaving the glass spotless again. I backed into the corner of the room, eyes locked on the balcony glass. The footprints had faded as if they'd never been there, but I knew I hadn't imagined them. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out the steady thrum of the ship. I didn't sleep. The rest of the night. The next morning, I demanded to change cabins. The woman at guest services tilted her head politely, but shook it. "We're at full capacity, sir. I can make a note of your concern, but I can't move you." I wanted to scream at her, but what would I even say? There are footsteps above my cabin on a deck that doesn't exist, and someone's leaving wet. Footprints on my balcony door. She'd smile and tell me noise travels strangely, that salt air fogs the glass. So I nodded tightly and walked away. The day blurred by. I tried to lose myself in crowds, sitting in the atrium, watching shows, eating at the buffet even when I wasn't hungry. But I kept glancing at the ceiling, flinching at every thud of footsteps in the crowded halls. When I returned to my cabin that evening, something waited for me. Slipped under the door, half soaked with water, was a folded scrap of crew's stationery. I bent down with shaking hands and picked it up. Written in messy black ink were 5 words: "Stop moving, we hear you." The paper reeked of seawater. I stumbled back, chest tight. My first thought was to run straight to security, shove the note in their faces, force them to listen. But some deeper instinct kept me inside, like if I showed anyone else, whoever left, it would know I'd broken their rule. That night, I left every light on, the TV blaring for background noise, and sat fully dressed on the bed. At 2:41 a.m., the footsteps came back, slow, deliberate. They crossed the ceiling, stopping above the bed. I sat frozen, trying not to breathe. Then the voice came again, not from my phone this time, but from above. Muffled, but low and distinct. It spoke my name, slow and steady, drawing out each syllable. I clamped a hand over my mouth, body shaking. The footsteps resumed, circling the room. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl, the groan of metal, like something dragging across the roof. My lights flickered, the TV screen blipped black for half a second, and then silence. I stayed awake until dawn, shaking, staring at the ceiling. The following day, I tried once more to push guest services for a room change. I didn't even mention the voices, this time just begged them, said I wasn't comfortable, that I didn't feel safe. The woman checked her screen and said there'd been a cancellation. I nearly cried with relief. They moved me to decks down, cabin Clamari Busaratos 23. It felt brighter, less oppressive. I sat on the bed for hours, just listening to the normal hum of engines, telling myself it was over that night. I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in days, until 2:41, the footsteps returned. Above me, my blood went cold. I was 2 decks lower, There were at least 3 levels above me now, but the sound was still right there, in the ceiling, as if it followed me. The steps moved across the roof, slow and steady. Then they stopped above the bed, and this time I heard breathing, shallow, steady, directly over me. I pulled the blanket over my face like a child, my heart thudding so hard I thought I'd black out. The breathing stopped. Silence pressed down. Heavy, suffocating. I counted the seconds. 1 minute, 2, 5 ... and then 3 sharp knocks rattled the headboard of my bed. Not the wall, the headboard itself, as if something inside the ceiling had struck it from above. I screamed, scrambled off the mattress, and slammed into the opposite wall, chest heaving. The knocks echoed again, softer this time, like taunting Dot by morning. I was done. I packed my bag and dragged it to security, demanding to be escorted off at the next port. The officer took my statement with an expressionless face, nodded, and promised I'd be disembarked quietly in 2 days, 2 nights, the first. Of those nights, I barricaded myself in the bathroom, locking the door and sitting on the tile floor with my back against it. I thought maybe, somehow, the sound wouldn't follow me there. At 2:41, the footsteps came again, not above the ceiling this time, directly overhead. On the bathroom roof, the light flickered once, then 3 soft taps came against the tile above. My head, I pressed both hands to my ears and cried silently until dawn. On the final morning, I rolled my suitcase to the gangway before anyone else. The air outside smelled of port fuel, of land. I clutched my passport like a lifeline, but when I reached the exit checkpoint, the crew member scanned my card and frowned. "Strange," she said. "Our records show you already disembarked last night." My chest tightened. "That's not possible. I've been in my cabin." She scanned again, forced a smile. "Probably a system glitch. Enjoy your day." I didn't argue. I just walked off, dragging my bag across the concrete, desperate for land under my feet. At the hotel that night, I showered for the first time in days, scrubbed the salt from my skin, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came instantly, heavy and dreamless, until 2:41 a.m. I woke to the sound of footsteps above me, and I was on the ground floor. The first photo the ship's photographer handed me made my blood run cold because it showed me standing somewhere I'd never been. It happened on the second evening of the trip. I'd wandered into the atrium where the photographers had set. Up their display wall dozens of glossy prints, clipped neatly for passengers to admire and buy. Families laughed, couples leaned in close, strangers pointed at themselves, caught mid-drink or mid-dance. I had no intention of buying one. I was traveling alone, and I hated my own smile in pictures. But when the photographer in the red vest spotted me, his face lit up. "Got some great ones of you," he said. "Want to see?" I frowned. I didn't pose for any. He just grinned, wider, and pulled a stack from under the counter. He held up the first photo, and I swear the floor swayed harder beneath me. It was me, standing at the very front of the ship on the forward deck, both hands gripping the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. My jacket collar was up against the wind, my hair plastered slightly from sea spray. I looked tense, almost fearful, like I knew someone was watching. But I hadn't been on the forward deck once. At the exact time this must have been taken, I'd been eating alone in the buffet lounge. I laughed shakily and pushed the photo back toward him. "That's not me." He tilted his head. "Looks exactly like you," and it did. My same jacket, my same tired eyes, but I knew with a sick certainty I'd never stood in that spot. I walked away fast, ignoring the rest of the stack he tried to show me. My chest was tight all through dinner, and even the music from the lounge show couldn't drown the image from my head. The next morning, I passed the photo wall again. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. That's when I saw it. Another picture of me. This time, I was sitting poolside in a lounge chair, sunglasses perched on my head, a cocktail sweating in my hand, except I'd spent the whole morning in my cabin, blinds shut, nursing a pounding headache. I stared at the print, my mouth dry. Passengers bustled past me, pointing at their own photos, laughing. I looked around, scanning the crowd. For a second, I thought I saw someone watching Mia. Man in a baseball cap, lingering just far enough back. When I turned fully toward him, he slipped into the crowd and vanished. That night, when I returned to my cabin after the show, a glossy print was waiting on the floor, half pushed under my door. I picked it up with shaking hands. It showed me lying in my cabin bed, eyes closed, blanket pulled up to my chest. I nearly dropped it. Someone had been inside. Someone had stood over me while I slept and captured the most vulnerable moment of my life. I shoved the desk chair under the handle, turned on every light, and sat wide-eyed until the sun rose. By morning, I could barely think. I stumbled to guest services with the photo and slapped it on the counter. Someone took this inside my cabin. The woman behind the desk smiled at first till she looked down. Her expression drained in an instant. Our photographers only shoot in public. Areas, sir, she said softly. Then who took it? My voice shook. How did this end up under my door? She hesitated, glanced at a security guard across the lobby, then slid the photo back toward me. We'll make a note of it. That was all. I walked away trembling, photo burning in my pocket. That night, I set my phone recording video aimed at the door. I placed a glass bottle on the handle so even the slightest touch would rattle it. I lay in bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. At 3:08 a.m., I heard the scrape, paper sliding softly across carpet. I sat up, heart hammering, and grabbed the phone. The bottle hadn't moved. No sound but the faint thrum of engines. Yet when I opened the door, another photo lay waiting. This one showed me exactly as I was nassetting up in bed, blankets shoved aside, phone clutched in one hand. I dropped it instantly, bile rising in my throat. Whoever was doing this wasn't. Behind my door, they were closer. They were watching in real time. I didn't leave my cabin the next day. I paced the tiny space until I felt sick, every creak of the walls making me spin toward the door. But avoiding the rest of the ship didn't stop the photos. By evening, a new one appeared under the door. It showed me pacing, one hand pressed to my forehead. Just hours earlier, I ripped it to shreds, hands shaking, and stuffed the pieces into the trash. But shredding it didn't stop the next up to 2:55 a.m. Another photo slid onto the carpet. This one froze my lungs. It showed me opening the door to pick up the last photo, camera catching the exact moment before. Whoever was taking them wasn't just a step ahead, they were anticipating me. I bolted the chair against the door, sat in the corner with the lights on, and clutched my phone until dawn. When daylight finally came, I stumbled to the open deck, desperate for air. I gripped the railing, staring at the endless horizon. That's when I felt it, another piece of glossy paper in my jacket pocket. My heart stopped. I hadn't put it there. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was a photo of me standing exactly where I stood now, gripping the railing, eyes wide. In fear, I dropped it and staggered back, spinning in circles, scanning faces. A photographer in a red vest stood 20 feet away, camera hanging at his chest. He lifted it slowly, met my eyes, and smiled. I ran. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, every light on, photos scattered around. Me, at 3 a.m., the phone on the desk rang, sharp and jarring. I didn't answer. It rang again and again. On the fourth call, I picked up with shaking hands. A voice, low and calm, whispered, "We have so many more." I slammed the phone down, heart pounding, tears stinging my eyes. By the final morning of the cruise, I had a stack of photos that didn't belong to reality. Shots of me in places I'd never been. Shots of me sleeping, eating, standing in corners I'd never visited. Every angle of my life, captured without consent, returned to me like trophies. I shoved them all into my bag, desperate to get off. The ship, disembarkation, was chaos lines of passengers, luggage clattering, announcements blaring. I clutched my passport like it might anchor me to the real world again. When it was finally my turn, the crew member scanned my card. She frowned, scanned again. "That's strange," she said. "System shows you already disembarked this morning." My mouth went dry. "That's not possible. I'm right here." She forced a smile, waved me through. "System glitch. Have a nice day." I walked off the ship, bag dragging behind me, heart racing. The port air hit me like relief, sharp and real. I didn't stop until I reached my hotel, where I finally collapsed into bed, curtains drawn, door bolted. For the first time all week, I slept, until 3 a.m. when I woke to the sound of something sliding across the carpet. I sat up slowly, dread crawling through me, and turned on the light. A single glossy photo lay just inside the door. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was me, lying in this very hotel bed, eyes wide open, staring in terror at the exact moment I held the picture in my hands. The phone on my cabin desk rang at exactly 3 a.m., and when I answered, I heard my own voice whispering my name. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I sat there half awake, the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to static crackle between each faint syllable, but then the whisper grew clearer. It wasn't just a recording or some distorted echo. It was my exact tone, my exact rhythm. "Don't move," it hissed. "They're right outside." My breath caught in my throat. My eyes shot to the cabin door, the faint glow of the hallway light seeping in from the crack underneath. For a moment, I was too stunned to move, frozen in the dim cabin as the engines throbbed faintly through the floor. "Who is this?" I whispered into the phone, but the voice overlapped mine, repeating the warning word for word. I dropped the receiver, the hollow clatter making me flinch. My heart pounded in my ears as I scrambled toward the door. I pressed my ear against it. Silence, just the soft hum of the ship. Then I heard its slow, deliberate footsteps pacing past my cabin. One pair, heavy, unhurried. They paused directly outside. I backed away, pressing myself against the desk, every nerve in my body screaming not to make a sound. The footsteps lingered, then resumed, fading down the hall. I waited until dawn before I dared to move again. My body shook so badly I could barely hold the phone when I tried to read. The line was dead. By breakfast, I had almost convinced myself I had hallucinated it. Maybe exhaustion had blurred reality. Maybe it was a prank call from another guest. But the phrase echoed in my head. Don't move, they're right outside. Later that day, I stopped at guest services. I tried to sound calm as I asked, "Can cabin phones receive outside calls?" The woman behind the counter smiled politely. "No, sir, only internal guest to guest or crew to guest. And they don't connect to outside lines while at sea." So, what about recordings? Could someone play something through? Her smile faltered. Not likely. Was there a problem with your phone? I hesitated, then shook my head. Just curious. She nodded, typed something on her keyboard, and moved on to the next passenger. That night, I locked the door, slid the chain across, even shoved the desk chair against the handle. I sat on the bed with the lights on, staring at the phone. Midnight passed to a .m, crawled by. At 3 o'clock sharp, the phone rang again. The shrill sound sliced through the silence. I jumped, pulse hammering, but I forced myself to answer. This time, the voice was louder, clearer. My voice, "Don't leave. Don't open the door." I stammered into the receiver. "Who are you? What do you want?" The whisper overlapped. Me again, repeating the same warning. Then it dropped to a softer tone, almost mocking. "We hear you." The line went dead. I sat frozen, my breath ragged. Then the knocking began. To slow knocks at the cabin door. Not frantic, not polite, just deliberate, measured. I stared at the door, too terrified to move. After a long silence, another knock came. Then the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I skipped breakfast. I couldn't face the dining hall chatter, not when I hadn't slept. I sat on the deck with a coffee, staring out at the endless ocean. The waves seemed to calm, too vast, as if mocking how trapped I felt on this ship. When I returned to my cabin, a folded note lay on the carpet just inside the door. Someone had slipped it under while I was gone. My hands shook as I unfolded. It, in block letters, it read, "Answer again tonight." I dropped the note like it was burning. My cabin felt smaller with it lying there on the carpet, the words staring up at me. "Answer again tonight." I stuffed it into the drawer and slammed it shut, as if hiding it could make it less real. But all day, no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the weight of those words. In the buffet line, I felt eyes on me. On the promenade deck, I swore someone walked in step just a few paces behind. Even in the crowded theater that evening, laughter and applause couldn't drown out the throb of dread in my chest. By the time I returned to my cabin, I already knew I wouldn't be able to stop myself. I would answer the phone again. Curiosity is a crueler trap than fear. I sat fully clothed on the bed, eyes fixed on the phone. The hours dragged. At 2:59 a.m., my palms were slick with sweat. At exactly 3 o'clock, the phone rang. I picked it up with shaking hands. "Good," my voice whispered. Through the static, "You listened." My throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" The whisper paused, then said, "Check the door." My chest locked up. "No." The whisper grew harsher, overlapping itself like two versions of me speaking at once. "Check the door." I set the receiver down slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. Against every instinct screaming not to, I crept toward the cabin door. I pressed my ear against it. Silence, then soft breathing, just on the other side. I jolted back, covering my mouth. The phone was still off the hook, my own whisper bleeding faintly into the room. Another sound followed, the slow slide of paper under the door. I forced myself to look. A glossy photograph lay on the carpet. It was me, standing exactly where I stood. Now, staring at the door, I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My hands shook as I snatched the phone. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The whisper chuckled my chuckle, my cadence. "You'll see." The line went dead. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair, staring at the photograph. The faint smile on my own face caught in its glossy sheen. By morning, I was hollow. I carried the photo to security, slammed it on the counter, and said, "Someone is stalking me. Someone is breaking into my cabin." The officer picked it up, frowned, then looked at me. This could be a trick of the mirrors, or a guest, with a resemblance. "That's me," I snapped. "In my cabin, last night. How else could anyone take this?" He sighed, made notes, promised to monitor. His eyes told me he didn't believe me. That night, I thought of unplugging the phone. But what if that made it worse? What if ignoring it was exactly what they didn't want? So I sat again, staring at the clock. At 3 o'clock, the phone rang. I lifted the receiver. My voice came through, softer this time. "Look behind you." My stomach dropped. I spun around. The room was empty, but another photo lay on the desk. This one showed me holding the phone, mouth open in shock. Seconds earlier, I hurled it across the room and shouted into the receiver. "Stop. What do you want from me?" The whisper chuckled again. "We're getting closer." For the next 2 nights, the routine continued. The phone rang. My voice whispered commands. Each time, a new photo appeared me at the desk, me asleep. Me opening the balcony curtains, all moments from my own life, captured seconds before I lived them. I couldn't take it anymore. On the final morning before disembarkation, I packed frantically, stuffing everything into my bag. I didn't care about my assigned checkout time. I just wanted off. When I opened the cabin door, one last envelope waited on the floor. Inside was a single sheet of cruise. Stationary dot written in my own handwriting were the words, "This won't end when you leave." I dropped it and ran. Disembarkation was chaos, passengers dragging suitcases, announcements echoing. When my turn came, the crew member scanned my card, frowned, and said, "Strange. System shows you already disembarked." Early this morning, my heart stuttered. "That's impossible. I'm right here." She forced a smile, waved me through. "System glitch. Have a safe trip." I stumbled down the gangway, desperate to put distance between myself and the ship. The port air was thick, salty, but real. Solid ground under my feet felt like salvation. That night, in my hotel room, I finally exhaled. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and collapsed into bed. For the first time in days. Sleep came quickly. Until 3 a.m. the phone on the nightstand rang. I sat bolt upright, dread crawling through me. Slowly, I picked up the receiver. Static hissed on the other end. Then my own voice whispered, calm and steady, "Told you it wouldn't end." The first time it happened, I thought I'd misheard. I was standing at the buffet, debating between eggs or pancakes, when the server behind the counter handed me a plate and said, "Here you go, Mr. Harlan." I blinked sorry. She gave me a quick smile, unfazed. "Extra syrup, just like yesterday, Mr. Harlan." My throat tightened. "That's not my name." She tilted her head, a smile faltering. "Of course it is." Then she turned to the next passenger, ending the exchange. I carried the plate back to my table, appetite gone. Maybe she'd confused me with someone else. But the way she'd said it, with certainty, made my skin crawl. Later that afternoon, a crew member cleaning the hallway stepped aside to let me pass. "Evening, Mr. Harlan," he said warmly. I stopped. "That's not my name." He blinked at me like I was joking. "You don't remember?" I shook my head hard and hurried to my cabin, heart pounding by the third time. I couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. A bartender leaned across the counter, slid a drink I hadn't ordered toward me, and said, "Your usual, Mr. Harlan." The liquid inside was dark red, the glass chilled with condensation. "I didn't order this," I said. "And that's not my name." His smile didn't falter. "Sure it is. You always say that." I shoved the glass back and walked away, the hairs on my arms prickling. That night, I tried to calm down, telling myself it was just mistakes piling up. Too many guests, too many faces maybe. I resembled some regular passenger, but the thought gnawed at me. If that were true, why did they all use the same name? Why Harlan? I locked my cabin door, shoved the chain across, and lay staring at the ceiling, the steady thrum of the engines filling the silence. I drifted off some time after midnight. At 2:47 a.m., the phone rang. I jolted upright, fumbling in the dark. I picked up the receiver with a shaky hand. "Mr. Harlan," a voice whispered. My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The line crackled with faint static. Then the same voice repeated, firmer this time, "Mr. Harlan, we need you." "I'm not," my voice cracked. "That's not my name." Silence stretched on the line. Then came the sound of heavy breathing, slow and deliberate, before the line went dead. I sat frozen, clutching the phone. My reflection in the darkened balcony glass stared back at me, pale and trembling. For the first time, I wondered if I was losing my mind. The next morning, I dragged myself to guest services, dark circles under my eyes. I demanded to know if my reservation had been filed under the wrong name. The clerk typed on her keyboard, then looked up brightly. "No, sir. You're listed exactly as you should be." "Then why does everyone keep calling me Harlan?" Her smile faltered for the briefest second, then snapped back into place. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." I leaned closer. "It's happened over and over, at the buffet, at the bar, even on the phone in my cabin." She gave a nervous laugh. "We'll make a note." The same phrase they always used when they didn't want to deal with a problem. I stormed out, but the unease clung to me. As the day dragged on, more crew greeted me by that name. A waiter, a security guard, even the photographer in the atrium, who smiled as he snapped a candid shot and said, "Smile for us, Mr. Harlan." That night, when I returned to my cabin, a folded note lay under my door. I bent down with trembling hands and picked it up in neat block letters. It read, "Stop denying who you are." I crumpled the note in my fist, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The words burned in my head. "Stop denying who you are." I shoved it into the drawer, locked the cabin door, and sat trembling on the bed, trying to convince myself it was just another prank. But no prank could explain how so many crew members knew that name. Sleep didn't come. I lay awake listening to the drone of the engines beneath the floor, the creak of the ship rolling with the waves. At 3 a.m., right on schedule, the phone rang again. I forced myself to answer. "Mr. Harlan," the voice whispered, calm and steady. "I told you," I said hoarsely. "That's not my name." The silence stretched. Then, softly, the voice chuckled. It was my chuckle. My cadence. You've always been Harlan, it whispered. You just forgot. I slammed the phone down, hands shaking. I stayed awake until the sky began to lighten, but even then the unease clung to me. By breakfast, I looked like a ghost. When I sat down in the dining hall, the waiter didn't even hand me a menu. He just said, the usual, Mr. Harlan, and walked away before I could protest. Moments later, he set down a plate of food I'd never seen before: eggs scrambled with something dark mixed in, toast cut diagonally, a glass of tomato juice sweating beside it. My stomach twisted. I hadn't ordered it, but the smell felt familiar, in a way I couldn't place. I pushed the plate away and left before touching it. In the corridor back to my cabin, a housekeeper with a cart stopped me. She smiled warmly, too warmly, and said, "Good morning, Mr. Harlan. We freshened your other room." I froze. What other room? Her smile didn't falter. 6115, of course. I don't have another cabin, I said sharply. Her head tilted, her eyes narrowing just slightly, like she pitied me. Not anymore. I pushed past her, my skin crawling, and hurried to my cabin. When I arrived, another note waited under the door. I bent down slowly, stomach sinking. This one read, "Check 6115. I told myself not to. I told myself to ignore it, to barricade my room and wait for land. But curiosity dug its claws in deeper than fear. By late afternoon, I found myself standing outside cabin 6115, 2 decks below mine. The door stood ajar by a crack. I pushed it open with one finger. Inside, the cabin was a mirror of mine: same bed, same desk, same bland art on the wall. But the suitcase by the bed was mine. The clothes hanging in the closet were mine. And on the desk, framed in glossy prints, were photographs of me. Some I recognized: me on the promenade deck, me at dinner, me staring out at the ocean railing. Others I had never seen: me smiling with strangers I didn't remember meeting, me playing cards at a table I'd never sat at, me laughing in a way that felt wrong. My throat closed. I stumbled backward and fled, the door slamming behind me. That night, I locked myself in my real cabin. At 3 a.m., the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer, almost, but something compelled me, a pull I couldn't resist. I lifted the receiver with trembling fingers. "Mr. Harlan," the voice whispered. "You left too soon." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The whisper chuckled again, low and satisfied. "Look in the mirror." I spun toward the bathroom, my breath catching. The mirror above the sink reflected my pale, exhausted face, except it wasn't quite mine. The jawline was sharper, the eyes colder, the smile stretching just slightly. Too wide, I staggered back, the phone slipping from my hand. The reflection leaned forward, lips moving though I hadn't spoken. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what they were. "Stop denying who you are." I fled the cabin, barefoot, heart hammering, sprinting down the empty corridor. I didn't stop until I reached the open deck. The night air was icy, the ocean black and endless. I gripped the railing, gasping for breath, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. Then I felt a hand clap onto my shoulder. I spun around. A crew member stood there, smiling faintly. "Careful, Mr. Harlan," he said. "You wouldn't want to fall again." "Again," I whispered. He just smiled wider. I shoved past him and ran back inside, my chest tight with panic. By the morning of disembarkation, I was a wreck. I dragged my bag to the gangway, desperate to leave the ship behind. The crew member scanned my card, frowned, and looked at me. "Strange," he said. "Records show Mr. Harlan already disembarked earlier this morning." My mouth went dry. "That's not my name." He smiled politely, too politely. "Of course not, sir." He waved me through, on the bus to the Port Hotel. I clutched my bag and tried to calm down. Land, safety. This nightmare was over, but when I reached my hotel room and dropped my suitcase by the bed, I noticed something waiting on the nightstand. A folded note. With trembling hands, I opened it. The same block letters stared back at me. "Welcome home, Mr. Harlan." The moment I stepped into the dining hall, I stopped dead in my tracks, because someone was sitting at my table, my usual seat, and it was me. I don't mean someone who looked vaguely like me, or a man with the same haircut. I mean me, same jacket, same tired expression, same scar along the side of the jaw I'd carried since high school. He sat there casually, fork in hand, chatting with the waiter like he'd been dining there every night. My throat closed. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself, my knees trembling. The waiter turned, spotted me, and frowned in confusion. "Oh, Mr. Gray, you're already seated." My mouth went dry. "No, I stopped, because the man at my table looked up, and when his eyes locked onto mine, something inside me collapsed. They were my eyes. The exact same shade, the exact same stare I saw in the mirror every morning. He smiled faintly, raised his glass of red wine, and nodded at me like we were old friends. Then he went right back to his meal. I stumbled backward. A few passengers glanced my way, curious, but no one seemed alarmed. To them, it was nothing. To me, it was impossible. I turned and walked out, fast, chest tight, vision swimming. I didn't stop until I reached the open deck. The sea stretched endless and black, the air damp and sharp with salt. My breath came in ragged gasps. I told myself I was overtired, that I'd seen someone similar and my brain had filled in the blanks. That had to be it, but the certainty I'd felt when our eyes met haunted me. That was me in there. I didn't eat dinner. I spent the night pacing the promenade deck, too rattled to go back inside. By midnight I dragged myself to my cabin, locked the door, and collapsed on the bed fully clothed. When I woke the next morning, I convinced myself I'd hallucinated it. Sleep deprivation could do strange things. I hadn't been resting well. Since the trip started, too much noise, too much motion. At lunch, I finally braved the buffet. The cashier swiped my card and smiled. Back again so soon. My stomach dropped. "I haven't been here today." She tilted her head. "Of course you have. Eggs and fruit, an hour ago." I stared at her, but she had already turned to the next passenger. I left without taking food. Back in the corridor, I tried my cabin door. The card flashed red, again, red. My hands shook. I went to guest services. "My card isn't working." The attendant typed briskly, then looked up with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Strange. Our system shows you've already checked in." "I'm standing right here," I snapped. "How can it say that?" He shrugged. "Perhaps you confused the room number." "I know my room," I hissed. He hesitated, then reprogrammed. The card, when I returned, it finally worked. The cabin looked normal at first glance, but the bedspread was pulled back neatly, and on the desk sat a glass of water. Half-empty. I hadn't poured it. That night, I avoided the dining hall altogether. I drifted between the casino and the lounge show, too restless to settle anywhere. By 11:30, I was exhausted. I forced myself back to my cabin, locked the door, shoved the chair against it, and lay staring at the ceiling. At 3 a.m. The phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence. My body locked up, every hair on my arms prickling. I picked up with trembling hands. My own voice whispered on the other end. Calm, familiar. Why'd you leave dinner early? My chest froze. Who is this? The voice chuckled softly. My chuckle, then said, you looked hungry. I slammed the receiver down, heart racing, eyes darting around the dark cabin. My reflection in the balcony glass looked back at me, pale and terrified. The next morning, I thought about reporting it, but what would I even say? That I saw myself eating dinner, that my own voice had called me at 3 a.m. They'd lock me in. The infirmary, but the unease didn't fade. At breakfast, I found myself scanning the dining hall, half expecting to see him again. Every clink of silverware made me flinch. When I finally sat, the waiter approached and said, your usual seat. Mr. Gray. I looked down at the table. My seat, but someone was already sitting there, and when he lifted his head, once again, it was me. I froze in place, staring across the dining hall at the man in my seat. He wore my clothes, down to the scuffed jacket I'd bought last winter. His hair fell the same way across his forehead. His hands, my hands, rested calmly on the tablecloth as he lifted his glass and drank. No one else seemed to notice. Passengers chatted over plates of food. Waiters carried trays. Silverware clinked. Everything was normal except for the fact that I was watching myself sit at my own table. I backed out slowly, pulse hammering, and retreated to the hallway. My vision blurred as I pressed against the wall, struggling to breathe. My double hadn't chased me, hadn't done anything but sit and eat. But the look in his eyes when he glanced up, knowing, deliberate, burned into me. I didn't go back. I spent the day avoiding crowds, drifting aimlessly along the decks. But no matter where I went, I felt watched. In reflections, polished windows, chrome railings, thought I saw him. Sometimes smiling faintly, sometimes just standing, as if waiting for me to notice. That night, I tried to bar myself in. I shoved the desk against the door, double-bolted it, drew the curtains tight. I sat awake, every muscle tensed at 3 a.m. The phone rang. I nearly screamed. I picked it up with shaking hands, bracing myself. My voice came through the line. Calm, steady. Why don't you sit down and finish your meal? I slammed the phone down, heart hammering, and pressed my back against the wall. For a long time, the silence held. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. The scrape of a chair sliding across the carpet from inside my cabin. I spun around. The chair I'd wedged against the door was gone. It now sat neatly tucked under the desk, exactly as it had been when I first arrived. My knees buckled. I whispered, into the empty room, leave me alone. No answer came. The next morning, I went straight to security. I told them everything, the phone calls, the waiter calling me by name, the man in the dining hall. The officer listened with a stiff expression, then leaned back in his chair. Ships play tricks on the mind, he said. Mirrors, reflections, fatigue. Are you sure you're not overtired? I wanted to scream, but what good would it do? I left shaking, no closer to help than before. That evening, I forced myself to go to dinner. I needed to prove it to myself, one way or another. The moment I stepped in, The waiter greeted me with a smile. "Good evening, Mr. Gray. Your tables." "Ready?" I scanned the hall, dread coiling in my gut. My seat was already occupied. By him, he looked up, smirked faintly, and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Join me," he said. His voice carried just enough for me to hear over the noise of the room. The waiter looked between us like nothing was unusual. I backed away, trembling, and ran before I could stop myself. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. At 3 a.m., the phone rang again. My hand shook as I lifted the receiver. "You keep running," my own voice whispered. "But you can't run from yourself." I slammed it down, grabbed my suitcase, and began packing frantically. Clothes, toiletries, everything. Jammed into the bag, I didn't care that the cruise wasn't over. I needed off the ship. But when I opened the cabin door, my stomach dropped. My suitcase was already waiting in the hall, packed, zipped, identical to mine. A luggage tag dangled from the handle, printed neatly. "Gray." I stumbled back, slamming the door. My pulse hammered so hard my vision blurred. For the rest of the night, I sat in the corner, clutching the phone like a weapon. By disembarkation morning, I was nearly broken. I dragged my bag to the gangway, desperate to leave. The crew member scanned my card, frowned, and looked at me. "That's odd," he said. "Records show you already disembarked early this morning." My chest locked. "That wasn't me," I whispered. He forced a polite smile. "System glitch. Welcome back, Mr. Gray." I staggered down the ramp, half sure my legs would give out. The solid ground beneath me felt unreal. I made it to the Port Hotel, locked the door, and collapsed on the bed. Relief washed over me in waves. At least it was over. But at 7 p.m., when I went down to the hotel restaurant, the hostess smiled and led me to a table. "You're already seated," she said. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Across the room in the corner, I saw myself sitting, smiling, waiting. The pounding on my cabin door started so suddenly that I nearly fell out of bed. 3 sharp bangs, then silence. I sat up, my pulse racing, the dim glow from the balcony curtain just enough to show the outlines of the furniture. I listened, straining, holding my breath. The ship hummed steadily beneath me, the same low mechanical throb I'd grown used to. No voices, no footsteps. Cautiously, I slid out of bed and padded barefoot across the carpet. "Hello." My voice cracked as I pressed, my ear to the door. Silence. I waited. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then, just when I started to step back, the banging came again, louder this time, more insistent. I jolted away, heart hammering. "Who's there?" Still no answer. I forced myself forward, every nerve screaming not to, and pulled the door open. Just a crack. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, lined with identical cabin doors and faintly buzzing fluorescent lights. But taped to my door was a piece of crew stationery, dot in thick black letters. Scrawled across it were the words, "This cabin does not exist." The paper trembled in my hand as I tore it down. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, shoved the desk chair against the handle, and sat awake until the pale morning light seeped in through the curtains. When the sun rose, I tried to laugh it off. A prank, I told myself. Kids on the ship, someone, bored. But the memory of that pounding, the absolute silence in the hall when I'd checked it, gnawed at me. I carried the note to guest services. The woman behind the counter smiled politely as I slid it across. Someone left this on my door last night, I said. Cabin 5282. Her, Ismail, faltered. She typed quickly on her keyboard, then frowned. Sorry, sir. What number did you say? 5282. She turned the screen toward me. The manifest listed every cabin on my floor. 5281. 5283. No, 5282. There must be a mistake, I said, my throat dry. I checked in. I've been staying there for days. She pursed her lips, tapped again, and shook her head. That cabin doesn't exist. My palms went clammy. I have the keycard. I held it out. She scanned it. The screen flashed red. Invalid. That's impossible, I snapped. I slept there last night. Her smile returned, practiced and thin. We'll make a note. I left shaking, gripping the card so hard the plastic dug into my fingers. Back at my corridor, my chest tightened. As I walked past 5281, my door 5282 was still there. The number plaque gleamed, the handle waited. I slid my card in. The light flashed green. The lock clicked dot inside. Everything was just as I'd left it. Clothes folded on the chair, suitcase tucked in the corner, toiletries lined along the sink. The cabin was real. I was standing in it, but when I pulled open the desk drawer, I found another piece of stationery. On it, written in the same thick black letters, were the words, "You aren't supposed to be here." I dropped it, my stomach twisting. That night, I forced myself to stay out late. I wandered the casino, sat through half of the comedy show without laughing, drifted around the promenade until exhaustion made my legs heavy. When I finally returned, I hesitated in the hallway, staring at the door. The number plaque gleamed back at me. 5282. Real. Solid. But when I slid my card in, it hesitated for a second before the green light blinked. Inside, the bed was neatly made. I hadn't made it. On the desk sat a glass of water, half-empty beads of condensation running down the side. I backed out slowly, slammed the door, and spent the night in an armchair on deck 7, pretending to read a magazine. The next morning, bleary-eyed, I tried again with guest services. I'm telling you, someone is messing with me. My cabin is real. Walk with me, I'll show you. The man behind the desk looked uncomfortable, but followed. We walked the corridor together. I counted aloud. 5279, 5280, 5281, then straight. 25283. My door wasn't there. The walls stretched smooth and uninterrupted, as if nothing had ever been between them. I spun toward him, my chest seizing. It was right here. He gave me a nervous smile. Sir, you may be confused. Let's get you some rest. I shoved past him, my vision swimming. When I returned alone a half-hour later, the door had reappeared. 5282, waiting. I locked myself inside, every nerve screaming at 3 a.m. The phone rang. I picked it up with trembling hands. Static hissed, then a low whisper. Get out of that cabin before they erase you. The whisper on the phone echoed in my ears, long after the line went dead. Get out of that cabin before they erase you. I sat frozen, clutching the receiver until my hand ached. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the thought of stepping back into that hallway terrified me even more. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the door, half expecting it to vanish while I watched. When the sun finally came up, I shoved the phone under a pillow and left. I needed answers. I went straight to security. The officer at the desk gave me the same patient smile I'd seen too many times. I told him everything: the banging on my door, the notes, the cabin vanishing from the map, the staff insisting it didn't exist. He listened, nodded slowly, and then said, "Sir, I think you may be open." Sometimes I slammed my keycard onto the counter. "Scan it. Tell me this cabin doesn't exist." He sighed, swiped the card through his reader, and frowned. His screen flickered red. "Invalid." My heart sank. "It worked last night. It always works. Maybe you picked up someone else's card." "It's mine," I shouted. I was inside the cabin. His hand hovered near his radio. His smile returned, tighter this time. "We'll make a note." I left shaking with rage and terror. I wanted to grab him by the collar, drag him to the corridor, force him to see the door with his own eyes. But I didn't trust what I'd find if I went back. Instead, I spent the day drifting aimlessly, sitting in crowded lounges, clinging to the illusion of safety. But no matter where I went, I felt eyes on me. Crew members glanced at me strangely. Passengers shifted away. I caught reflections in the glass railings that didn't quite match my movements. By evening, exhaustion dragged me back to my hallway. My breath caught when I turned the corner. The door was gone. Smooth wall, no plaque, no handle. Just blank white paneling between 5281 and 5283. I pressed my palms flat against it, whispering, "No, no, no." But it was solid, seamless. I staggered backward, shaking. And then, just as I was about to run, the panel flickered. For a split second, like bad film burning, the door appeared again 5282, gleaming as always before vanishing back into smooth wall. My chest heaved. The air felt too thin. I turned and ran. That night, I tried to sleep in a deck chair under the stars. The ocean stretched endless and black, the wind cutting cold across my skin. I thought maybe being away from that cabin would break the pattern, but at 3 a.m. my phone buzzed. I froze. I hadn't brought it with me. It was still inside the cabin. The sound came anyway, muffled but clear. Ringing in my ears, I stumbled toward the elevators, desperate to find anyone awake, but the ship felt deserted. Corridors stretched empty, lights buzzed overhead, and every time I turned a corner, I swore I saw my cabin door waiting. Finally, I caved. I couldn't fight it anymore. I went back. The door stood solid again, number plaque gleaming, 5282. My keycard trembled in my hand as I slid it through. Green light, the lock clicked inside. The cabin looked normal. My suitcase sat in the corner. My jacket hung neatly on the chair. The bed was made, but on the desk lay another note. "You're already gone." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My vision swam. The phone rang. I grabbed it with shaking hands. "What do you want from me?" My own voice whispered back. "You were never supposed to be here." The line clicked, dead. The walls around me felt closer than before, the ceiling lower. My own reflection in the dark balcony glass looked warped, distorted, as if someone else wore my skin. I bolted, dragging my suitcase, and didn't stop until disembarkation morning. I was the first in line at the gangway, heart pounding, desperate, for land under my feet. When my turn came, the crew member scanned my card. He frowned. "Strange," he said. "This cabin number doesn't exist." I swallowed hard. "I know." He looked up, smiling too wide. Then where have you been sleeping? My chest seized. I grabbed my bag and ran down the gangway without answering. That night, safe in my port hotel, I finally let myself collapse. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat on the bed, whispering to myself, "It's over. It has to be over." At 3 a.m., the phone rang. I froze, staring at it, when I finally picked up. Static hissed, then my voice whispered one final phrase. "Cabin 5282 is waiting."